Okay, and I'm not seeing a trip counter popping up here. Oh, there we go. They stuck it on. Ah, they cute little restream changing the display format slightly, so labels and things that were in one spot are now somewhere else. Oh gosh, what could go wrong? Anyway, welcome to Evolution Hour. A little late today, but it's been a busy weekend. And remember, tortuganwordpress.com remains as an ancient fossil of material that I have done previously and that is freebie available live for everybody to look at. And why is the live counter not advancing? I don't know. There we go. Yeah, see, they put a little studio live counter up at the top of the screen on this new version, as opposed to inside my window, right above my head, where it was actually easier to see. But oh well, I have no control over what goes on in the restream formats. Away we go. Anyway, um, yeah, find our book, stuck that over here. Flip you back. Whoop. So, as you know, we are going through source by boring source, the technical literature that is being drawn on in Titans, the creationist book on dinosaurs, measuring precisely how much of it is representing factually versus stuff they are misrepresenting, and they've been running at about a 70% misrepresentation rate. Not a huge number of sources involved altogether. In fact, a monster chunk of it is merely creationist material, quite a bit from Sarfati himself. So it's recycling prior material. This also is a Luskin week. So we get to lob 3 more sources at you from their charming little list that doesn't prove the thing they were trying to set out to prove, which is that supposedly things like ALU retrotransposons, the majority of them, as in almost all, are supposedly designed. Even the 50% threshold level that Dan Stern Cardinale, after holding Luskin's feet to the fire and finally getting a commitment on it, wasn't coming clean on. And the data is simply not supporting that. In that respect, the Luskin segments are the most anticlimactic you could possibly imagine, although there's little bits and pieces of eccentricities that can reveal things about their method. And this will be one of those little episodes precisely because the sources are older. And that's measuring up to where a bit over half of the Luskin data field is from the last decade, not the 2020s. I wouldn't necessarily be a problem with anything, and this one here is just barely skipping over into the middle part from 2016. But still, the older the material is, the more intriguing it is, because it's unlikely to be helping their case any, because it's simply reinforcing the things we've already seen. That where you would be expecting big smoking guns to be happening is in material from the last decade. Where they would be building on this material to reach the threshold of functionality that Luskin and company would like to be the case. Since they have not had that to work with, trawling backwards through time for papers that just happen, ALUs or any of these other non-coding RNAs, isn't likely to be helping their case. And as it turns out, nope. And of course, once in a while, not every other show or so, we've got things that are poking up in the theodicy category. That we'll be having some more, I think, next week on that one. But anyway, back to our primary topic from Sarfati and Tape. This big monster chapter they have, the longest one, the most footnotes of anything, is attempting to pull apart the connections between birds and dinosaurs, and it's basically channeling Alan Fiducia and people circulating around Alan Fiducia. This particular one that I'll be lobbing, unfortunately, only the abstract. I was able to get the full paper on my own to confirm what was going on, but you'll only be getting the abstract, is from Larry Martin and Stephen Czerkas from 2000, which was pretty much summarizing the argument that they were fielding back 20 years ago, where they were thinking dinosaur skin, quote, is unlikely to represent a predecessor to a feather-bearing integument, unquote, missing the point that research on feather and hair development since 2000 has pretty much recognized that it's the deeper placodes of Archosaur skin integument, not necessarily the scale level, that's the source of these things. So it's largely an irrelevant point. And Martin and Czerkas were also going on with, quote, a confusion of flightless birds from the early Cretaceous of China with dinosaurs, unquote. Well, that one didn't wear very well. And so Sarfati and Tay trying to draw on that as an authority quote is pretty lame. Larry Martin, of course, with the Smithsonian, was one of those and remains one of the big foot draggers on the bird dinosaur model. Meanwhile, the people at the Museum of Natural History in New York, Norrell and all that crowd, have just moved on. We have noted in various episodes previously in the series. Anyway, the important issue here is the elephant in the room that Sarfati and Tay never allude to, which is the circus involved is the Stephen Circus of the Archaeoraptor mess. And it's ironic, this 2000 paper was right after the Archaeoraptor mess. So it's hot on the heels. Czerkas sidles on over to the dinosaur doubter camp, which didn't terribly lead all that well. Anyway, Sarfati and Tay also cite a paper from 2011 that we will be putting the linkage up to, Lindgren et al., which is on collagen in mosasaur skin. Ironically, it's not even primarily cited. It's secondarily via a quote from one of Fiducia's book. And Fiducia might have been prone to bring it up because his 2005 paper happened to be alluded to it along the way, although they were not making any claims particularly about feather origins versus collagen. So it's at best a misfire. Interesting paper, though. The other fun part is relating to a thing, again, unfortunately, only the abstract that was at the end of this quotation, the Fiducia was being quoted on, from Czerkas 1992, which is finding tail spines on a sauropod. And that was perfectly fine work, but not without, not without its flaws. Czerkas's work crops up in citations since. I did a follow-up to see where it was popping up. And there are two papers that we'll be putting links up to. One from 2022 by Pittman et al. On the origin of dino skin papillae. And another one from 2024 by Marthill et al. On some sauropod foot impressions that just kind of alludes to the Czerkas paper in passing. The fun part is from the Pittman paper, because they were actually taking issue with some of Czerkas's conclusions about skin papillae. So it'll be very interesting to cross-compare that with the other material that's going on. As I said, I started up very late this evening or morning, and it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we switched to daylight savings time. It's just it's been a hectic week or so. I've been doing an awful lot of last-minute triaging of the last remaining unsorted blobs of paper notes stuck downstairs in my basement, to the point where, miracles, my sorting station that was occupying virtually all of the pool table has finally been cleared away, to the point where before this year is out, we will actually be able to use our pool table as a pool table again. We now have a different sorting station for the chapters in the book, involving a little folding table and all that kind of stuff downstairs. At any rate, it's sorting through a bunch of material from mid-2000s on, varying, and to show you how hard copies are good to save. I have a section, of course, on biogeography in the new chapter that I'm just working on, about ready to hit the whales section in that, our Noah's Lost World chapter. And lo and behold, Cornelius Hunter took aim at me back when I was criticizing him back in 2006 at talkreason.org Interestingly, not only has Talk Reason disappeared online, so can't cite it directly, but Cornelius Hunter's oeuvre from that period have vaporized as well. So the ID the Future stuff, he's only got stuff from more recent, the 2020s. They haven't archived everything over there. So his critical response to me complaining about my criticism of him on biogeography, a very rare instance of biogeography popping up there. Typically, they rely on Casey Luskin, and for a while, Gunter Beckley was following in the Luskin. He returned to the fold at the DEI and has been pretty much carrying the cudgel again, going on and on and on and on and on about rafting primates, which filters all the way through to other people's apologetics who follow on that. We're only going to be alluding to that issue kind of peripherally, but at any rate, that's part of the reason why things have gotten all jiggery-pokery. Anyhow, the Luskin list, which is our part 2, as I noted, are a string of older papers from 2016. In fact, the next couple of weeks are going to be these older papers, which is interesting because why are they there unless they're part of this big swath? I'm getting the impression that the various people who contributed to this list just dumped masses of bibliography material. There's no annotations. It's not in alphabetical order. They're not in chronological order. They're not even strictly in thematic order. So it's just a mess trying to go through them. In my master spreadsheet that I'm collating all of this stuff, I'm putting everything into both thematic order in terms of their main list and also alphabetical order so that I can keep track of who's doing what about what and that as well. And the unused column functionally about, does this actually support their case? So we've got 3 papers. Alas, one, we're only going to be doing another abstract. It's a paper from Hu et al. On primate-specific ALU modulation. I was able, again, to get the original article so I could look to see what was going on. And I wonder, with these instances, so many of these papers that allude to the fact that you have ALUs in the primate genome as well as humans, and then, of course, the, I think, BLU or BMU counterpart over in mice, why they're there at all? Why, if we are unrelated to primates genealogically, how come we have the same repertoire of ALUs insertions into specific genes, which is rather interesting, why that's going on. At no point have I ever seen Luskin pay much attention to that. He still operates at a very superficial level, highly confident, as you can see when he was talking with Dan Stern Cardinale and others. I mean, Luskin is a bundle of self-confidence. Unjustified by the data field if you bother to look too closely on it. And then the next paper is from Shine et al. It's about long anti-RNAs in human and mice cells. Again, they're dealing with the dynamics of how these little retrotransposons can come into place. And I suspect they latched onto this because of a phrase in the abstract where the authors suspected, quote, endogenous sign-up UPSs may be widespread and present in many mammalian species, unquote. That would be just like catnip to them. They must have thought, ooh, widespread. Well, widespread can be lots of things. And as we know, there are maybe 5, 10, 15, 20%, depending on particularly the category, of these things are actually functional and play roles in genetic regulation and gene silencing and all sorts of stuff. It's from a field of millions of them. And that's why they can be simultaneously widespread and minor, because the issue from a design perspective is, what about all the ones that don't do anything, that are clearly just retrotransposons waiting to get their little chance to turn themselves on accidentally and either gum up the waste, or maybe accidentally, as the ones in our brain, kind of useful. That level of analysis is never being encountered anywhere in the design literature. Luskin's forays into this field I was just listening he was doing on allegedly on biogeography because of the Hunter bit. As I was poking around, I found one of their ID the Future podcasts from 2022, where Luskin was basically plugging their Science and Faith book that had come out the year before. And although the piece was about supposedly biogeography, it was just a gish gallop of intelligent design tropes, of which very little of it was actually about biogeography. He was just repeating the stupid thing about the rafting primates, which is just his repetitive go-to. Gunter Beckley was repeating the same trope over and over again. There's been some interesting developments of all that because of improvements in the fossil record of the otherwise fairly sparse early primates, as the Gish rule, the no cousins rule, and some of the things Skinner, Johnson, Gambit, and these other things that I came up with in the old tip book. Gish and company would never look at what the fossil representation would be. How big is the critter? How likely is it to be fossilized? What are the circumstances of it? There are perfectly good reasons why we're missing a lot of data. And just like Gish, Luskin, the Duane Gish of intelligent design, follows in pretty much the same footsteps. The biogeography chapter is such a pivotal element. First of all, has made a big deal, and rightly so, my co-author, as to why biogeography is an amazing piece of evidence for evolution. And the fact that Luskin is still pushing the argument that no, it's a big problem for evolution, it's because they never work out a model of their own. So they are not presenting a intelligent design explanation of why individual critters are known from individual locations and fit all that in to explain the available genetic data and available biogeographical relationships, and that they would still have to deal with dispersals in an intelligent design context, because unless they're arguing that everything was created in situ, and intelligent designers have never gotten to that point of thinking any of that through, they still have a degree of biogeography. So they aren't even operating at the level of shooting their foot off like the young Earth creationists do with their flood geology model that mandates a whole bunch of things have gone on without really thinking things through. So intelligent design is certainly still retaining its notion of creationism light. And then there's one more paper in the field on this ALU matter, which is from Tajidad, 2016. Again, where they were just beginning to find out the mechanisms of how ALUs can accumulate in a genome and how they can affect gene expression. They raise it or lower it. They were basically looking at beneficial treatments. So all of this stuff is simply a subset of the material that we've been looking at already, and encountering initially. It's almost looking like they were front-loading the newer papers in the beginning of the bibliography to catch your attention, because it's only as I've been plowing farther down through this mess that I've been starting to bump into papers that are way before this decade, and some of which go all the way back into the 1990s. We'll be able to get a full measurement on exactly where they're getting stuff and exactly how many things there are on the list once we get through every single one of the bloody things. That'll take us some while, but I'm thorough and diligent, and I can't give the thing up. We must know one way or the other. Gish, of course, I'm pretty well settled on the idea that once I finish the Sarfatian Tay book, it's going to be doing the master bibliography for the two big Duane Gish anti-creation fossil books, Evolution, The Fossils Say No, and the 1995 one, which the version I was dealing with is the 1971, so it's 20 years later. Evolution, The Fossils Still Say No, which is a bigger book. But the interesting issue is, since there's no reference bibliography and the like, is to figure out how much actually was added. Because I know from my own inspection, there's not a lot of source citations in the dinosaur section. And so it'll be very intriguing to see what was added, was anything removed, as well as big forays into the paleontological issues. Because with Gish, we're going to be bounding all the way back into Precambrian life and the origin of things in the Cambrian explosion, and then the origin of the various classes and insects and all this. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to be dealing with and documenting how, even by the standards of the period, Gish was amazingly superficial and evasive. The Casey Luskin of creationism, if we want to run the isomorphism the other direction. So let me first of all put a reminder of our dear patrons who have been, whoops, come on, through thick and thin and thin and thick. I utterly appreciate all that go on. And of course, as we start getting into potentially very dicey economic times with the impact of the Iranian war and inflation from the stupid tariffs and the fact that business incompetent Trump imagines he's the super duper businessman, and he's surrounded himself with a bunch of grifters and flacks who often better the worst hedge fund dealers ever. And here he is, the Commerce Secretary, or one of the top position he has, and then the other little that didn't quite make it onto the Federal Reserve, Mr. Smiley Face. It's a big mess. So our colleagues, researchers, assistant researchers, and friends and legacy patrons, we appreciate all the help you have stuck with all over these years. We are plugging away and will continue that we can. We're beginning to see, hopefully, the darkness at the end of the tunnel on the second volume of Rocks Were There, to eventually add up on my little shelf up there. And later on, we'll be, come on, what happened to little Mr. Camera? Come on. Why are we suddenly minimized? I don't know. There we go. That way up. I moved my Paralogs novels up there, and that once I get Rocks 2 out of the way, then I can put my brain, jump back into the 1870s mayhem that's going on with the fogs and running amok with Russian spies and mayhem out at Black Rock, Nevada, with makers digs and people with dipping in the wrong radioactive pool of water. I can tell you there's danger there. And spies galore and intrigue, as all the dangling loose ends that were in the first two novels are tied up in a great way. And then we can start launching into the more rambunctious adventures in novels 4 through 12, which every time we do a big project on the Jackson front, that will slow down the Paralogs production. But one thing happens after all. And it is I must say, it's a nice relaxation node, however, for my brain to be able to have the science-directed, rigorous, pay careful attention and never misrepresent the primary sources and do justice to the facts side of the science work. And then the rhapsodizing, dramatic arc characters and adventure stuff that I can do in the Paralog stories as exercising another half of my brain. So it's a fun dynamic that's operating on here. According to the counter clicking off at the top, we are at about 23 minutes. So, and I don't see anybody in the stream, and probably due to the fact that I came on very, very late, but we'll get some views once the thing is posted in the morning. Let us go ahead and put our advert up for Rocks Were There. Need to come up. Come on, little video. Come on. Tinka, 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 tinka. There we go. And go through my regular screen. And get it fired away. And commercial. Oh, hello, Maya. Yes, you came on to the scene. I started the show way late this time around, and we've got all of our material out of the way. So we'll have a bunch of stuff on paleontology and geology material relating to Stephen Czerkas and how he got folded into the Alan Fiducia wing of things, which then gets folded into Sarfati and Tay's attempts to keep dinosaurs and feathers apart. It's one of the big in terms of the technical literature because the science has just moved on. They're presenting an obsolete argument. They're forced into offering very dated material. And one of the neat things you can do in following up anybody that tries to dismiss bird dinosaur connections is who are they relying on, and are they troping stuff that they're getting secondarily? Because for all practical purposes, whether you're in the intelligent design camp or the young earth creationist camp, you can't avoid people trawling Alan Fiducia. The closest counterpart to it in terms of relentless fielding would be James Tour on the origin of life question that pops up not only on the ID side of things, but he's starting to penetrate into the young earth creationist camp, in part by directly doing so, because Tour has been popping up quite a lot on young earth creationist podcasts and the like, where the age of the earth is kind of left on this cutting room floor, and Tour can just go on and on, making his bold little claims. We'll have a neat little section in Rocks 2. In fact, in this in the cosmology chapter, kind of summarizing some of the most recent technical papers that have come out since the previous book came out in relation to origin of life things, origin of genetic codes, newer material on catalytic RNAs. There's a brand new paper that we'll be including in the references where they have found an autocatalytic RNA that generates its own template that's only 45 nucleotides long. That's quite tiny by organizational standards. So it's yet more piling up of bits and bits and bits of pieces as people are working out what they can and developing what they can. Whether or not it gets to the point where they can really start putting the pieces together in such a way that they can be tracing with a reliability that can be experimental to the very first replicators in a metabolic soup of raw materials that they can draw on for auto replication, and what form of life that was. We're way before Luca, remember, is a thing we'll see. Another brand new paper is indicating that DNA can kind of quibble into the area, kind of in reverse. There's some interesting little sidebars that's giving some indication of why the codon assignments are ending up the way they are. It's a giant puzzle, vastly more complicated than Fermat's last theorem, and that took 400 years to work out, and that only required pencil and paper, no experimentation. So why would we think that something as intricate as the origin of life, where the conditions of that are long gone? We live in a very different world of organisms that will chew up any material that gets metabolizable long before it can form a new form of life. And we have a different kind of atmosphere, and we don't have a late heavy bombardment of raw materials popping in. There's just a bunch of things that are not like the existing life systems. It certainly would be relevant if we can ever actually send sufficient a number of particularly human investigators that can look around the corners to see whether or not there was ever life on Mars, and then also Europa and these places out in these liquid water or liquid something or other moons that may or may not have the raw materials. Again, are showing up on like the asteroid Bennu. We're alluding to that in the book in our discussion of how creationists mangle asteroids and comets and all that, which are still common tropes. Saturn's rings is another one that gets utilized, although it's starting to fade in a lot of the creationist literature, unless you have people copying older material, that it's not quite as relentless as it used to be. It's fun to see what tropes have persisted since the Henry Morris era versus ones that have kind of come along since then. And in large measure, the cosmology stuff is them avoiding topics. So they kind of poo-poo and downplay the Big Bang and dark matter and dark energy. But there's Danny Faulkner warning them, no, this is not going away. You have to figure out how it relates to the young Earth creationist argument. Fat chance on that one, but try giving it a trick. So anyway, that brings us up to speed on that part. We are again, I was about ready to dive into the whale section in the new book, and then after that, there will be a big section on the Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon was a tricky one to locate because it's clearly a flood geology related trope, but the flood mythos and all the stuff expanded to the point that I realized that the paleogeographical issues of these paleo worlds covering billions of years in the Grand Canyon evidence works as a perfectly fine topic here. So I'll be folding all of that material in, plus a sidebar on my own Pacific Northwest, because Nick Zentner out of the Central Washington University has been going great guns on making sense of the amazing geology that we have in the area, underscores how little creationists pay attention to it. And apart from little scattershot references to the Missoula floods and the Columbia basalt, we're pretty invisible on the creationist scheme. So quite amazingly, just in the latest issue of Acts and Facts, along comes Tim Clary in his long obsessions with going through the national parks and pointing out how supposedly it's all the flood, issue after issue. Well, he hits the North Cascades, and that's in my neck of the woods. And North Cascades has got interesting paleogeology that is, and these little isolated terrains that is just way beyond the data field that's being presented by Tim Clary in that little Acts and Facts arguments, which, by the way, those articles almost invariably avoid technical literature. They get kind of general things, geological survey treatments that are very summarizing kinds of works, but there's technical literature behind there, and that's going to be alluded to in the work. So that's going to be a very, very nice little sidebar. Although we are not the most spectacular area in the world for fossils, although there are a few interesting ones, and we do bump into a lot of geological periods. There's little stray examples of Cambrian trilobites from Washington State, but where we excel is this is geology central, because we've got the magma plume material from the Columbia basalts, we have the Ice Age glacial dam breakups, we have exotic terrains up the yin yang as the North American continent was slamming into stuff that had formed out in the Pacific Ocean and eventually got fragmented and squiggled around in things. So there's bits and pieces of stuff going back hundreds of millions of years, including little bits of the old red sandstone from Britain, from the Silurian, I think. So it's an area that is just Looney Tunes to try to account for in a flood geology context, which would pretty much account for why young Earth creationists shy away from the Pacific Northwest. And because they shy away from it, well, that means we won't. So that will be coming attraction material that as we plug some of the material in, I may include little references and stuff to it in the little part 2 sections of future episodes. We'll see how things go. It's a juggling act to figure out what's going on. Being in my 70s and more active intellectually and project-wise than I have ever been in my life, is a fun juggling act to deal with. But it certainly is invigorating and exciting and fun, and would have been impossible 20 years ago, because the availability of data, the tools that are available from the kinds of printers and scanners and the like, my little war game that I'm doing, my politique game that friend Peter is working on with the 3D printing and all of that. That's all stuff that is just out of the blue, new technologies, and opens up options to be able to do stuff and organize things on a scale that's just astonishing. And the sheer availability of technical literature means that anybody that's wanting to defend the standard scientific framework, whether it's going against anti-vaxxers in the way Dan Farina does, and discussing the claptrap that creationists do, as a Dapper Dino will, and the wonderful paleoanthropology of Gutsick Gibbon, and the genetic stories that Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock and others have brought up. This is like golden age for ammunition, because we don't have to rely upon National Geographic and Scientific American articles and secondary coverage online. No, you can dive straight in and in most cases find vast amounts of technical literature, full text, available to share. Anybody that wants to do videos on this the way I'm doing, please put links in. Allow people, encourage people to look at the primary source material, because the more they have to deal with the primary source data field, the tougher row it is for the pseudoscientists to get their headway. They can only get by while they can constrain the data field and ignore data and rely upon faulty material and presenting it in a way and hoping that their audience never fact checks them. And to the extent that we can nudge people more and more onto a source methods approach, which all of those names that I just mentioned, Gutsick, Gibbon, etc., these are all functionally source methods people. They all came into it in the same way I did, just by delving into things and finally going to the point of, wow, where is this idiot getting their information from? Why are they thinking this? Did they not check? At that moment, when you start analyzing at that level, you're at source methods. And the more people who do that, you need to be able to do that to make judgments in politics and economic policies and investment issues. It has practical world implications. And the number, I was just watching a interview on the Bulwark where some people were scavenging and listening to the tales of Gen Zers who were burned to crisps and lost, in some cases, millions of dollars on Donald Trump's stupid crypto schemes. And that is yet another matter of the sadder, wiser need to have those source methods things. And as we move into potentially disastrous economic times, making sound decisions on the basis of sound data and not listening to and following the Pied Piper of hucksters and people whose skill set at video is far better than their skill set at data, pile-ups of what are amounts to Ponzi schemes and grifting. And Donald Trump is one of the grifters in chief. He's built a lot of his finances on gulling people out of money in their investments and letting them hold the bag. He has presumably done the same thing with the crypto bit, where he puts his money in, luring people in, and then takes his money out and profits, and then lets everybody else to hold the bag. It's theft. It's unregulated, so it's not illegal theft, but maybe an outraged population that votes the right people into office, and that we have a progressive reform era and holding people to account and passing legislation to deal with these things and regulate things where they need to be regulated, counterpart of what was done in the 1930s after the Depression, and to some extent in the period after the Great Depression of the 1890s, with you see in the progressive era, Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson and all that crowd, La Follette and various other peoples going on in the turn of the century that broke up Standard Oil and all that. We need to break up these big media, the big banks. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. So we're about to live through really exciting times that will be bad in some ways, but can have some great silver linings in the same way that 1905 and 1935 had in terms of reform and improving our republic to make sure that we don't have messes like this again. And we want to make sure that in every respect, we learn our lessons as to why Donald Trump and MAGA was such a colossally bad idea, and why we, at our peril, ever try to do anything like that stupid again. So there's my little soapbox for the moment. And we're a little past the half hour. We put our adverts on. Everybody stay safe. Watch out for climate problems and heat waves and freezing waves and rampaging ice agents and problems with supply issues because of the stupid Iran war and all the other messes that are going on in our overly exciting times. And hopefully we'll all be here next week when we have yet another episode of Evolution Hour. So shutting down the old stream, and everybody stay safe and keep an eye out for the laser wielding penguins.